Breaking Bad, the thin line between justice and just us. Today, we're delving into the story of Charles Miceli, a man whose life has traversed the boundaries of law and crime, leaving a mark on both sides. He's a former enforcer with the Chicago outfit, a man deeply entrenched in organized crime who later became a key player in law enforcement. Most recently, Miceli played a significant role in the trial of Richard Proctor, a name that has become synonymous with betrayal and violence. This is Crime Bites. I'm your host, Carrie Drobin, a criminal defense attorney, multi-published, award-winning true crime author. I write about organized crime, outlaw motorcycle gangs, murder, and mass shootings. So, who exactly is Charles Miceli? Born and raised in the underbelly of Chicago's most feared crime family, Miceli spent decades ascending the mob's ranks. His expertise? Enforcing collections on behalf of some of the city's biggest mobsters. To put it bluntly, if you owed the family, aka the outfit, Miceli was the guy who knocked on your door. His deep-rooted connections with figures like Frank Calabrese Sr. and Joey Lombardo, aka the Clown, gave him insights into the operations and relationships within organized crime, setting the stage for his eventual cooperation with law enforcement. Yep, that's right. Miceli's ascent in the outfit was influenced heavily by family connections in Chicago's politically intertwined landscape. He was introduced to powerful figures at a young age, initially working under the guidance of a deputy sheriff named Igor. Yes, a sheriff. Igor, who had strong political ties, facilitated Miceli's early involvement by introducing him to key figures within his own police department. This early exposure led Miceli to connect with influential mob figures and engage in tasks that earned him trust and favor, and he was ultimately positioned as a trusted associate, helping both the mob and law enforcement. This was their symbiotic relationship. This was a world where friendships were currency and loyalty to the syndicate came before anything else. But in a plot twist few saw coming, Miceli crossed over into law enforcement completely. And no, he didn't go there through the usual channels. Instead, he secured his position through an under-the-table process involving monetary contributions and political favor. His entrance exam was little more than a formality. Pencil, a piece of paper in a back hallway. In a way, Miceli was groomed not just to be an enforcer, but to work within the system, ensuring that the outfit's interests were always protected. Fast forward a few decades, and here we are. Miceli, once a trusted mob affiliate and enforcer, now playing a vital role in prosecuting a criminal in a murder case. This time, he's not just defending territory, he's helping the state secure justice. Miceli became a central witness in the trial of Richard Proctor, a man accused of the cold-blooded stabbing of his best friend, Ryan Connell, on New Year's Eve. The trial spanned 4 years, with evidence building against Proctor, who, by the way, represented himself, and who was willing to go to extreme lengths to silence those who might testify against him. Here's where it gets interesting. Proctor reached out to Miceli, proposing that he eliminate a key witness. That's right, assassinate, a request that would have led to yet another murder in the name of self-preservation. But Miceli refused. Imagine that. A man with a history of violence and loyalty to the outfit chose to say no. For Miceli, this refusal was more than just a change of heart. It was a boundary he had drawn between his past and his present. Miceli's testimony not only shed light on the ruthlessness of Proctor's intentions, but it also helped the jury understand the mechanics of organized crime in a way that only an insider could explain. Thanks to Miceli's insights and his decision to stand on the right side of the law, Richard Proctor was convicted of murder after a 9-day trial, a verdict that brought closure to Ryan Connell's family and gave Miceli a new sense of purpose. It is ironic that a man who spent his life defending criminals found redemption in putting one behind bars. Charles Miceli's life serves as a powerful reminder of the thin line between law and crime, loyalty and betrayal. And it also shows us that the line between good and bad is not so clear-cut, right? There are shades of gray. It can be a fluid state, influenced by circumstance, environment, choice. Many law enforcement officers, for example, figures within the justice system, like Miceli in his early days, became entangled in corruption due to proximity to power, money, or just a need to belong. Miceli's journey underscores that even those who enforce the law can fall prey to moral compromise, just as those deeply enmeshed in crime can find a way back to integrity. In the end, Miceli's life is about redemption. He doesn't erase the past, he redefines it. He proves that people can change and choose which side of the law they want to stand on.
Good morning, number one, Carrie. It's nice to talk to you. Um, I started out my career in 1986. I worked for the Cook County Sheriff's Police. I actually started as a vehicle services worker, basically helping put squad cars together and maintain them. And I became very politically involved at a very young age in Chicago here. As your viewers may or may not know, everything revolves around politics. I worked for the Circuit Court of Cook County for a number of years prior to that, after I left high school. And then I went into politics, and from the sheriff's department as a civilian, I was actually deputized at the time. The former chief investigator, who at the time uh, was Jack Novelli, James Jack Novelli, was basically the chief investigator of the Sheriff's Merit Board. And back in the 80s, Elrod and O'Grady days, you didn't exactly just go take a police exam and become a police officer. So I went through the political process, which meant basically money. Uh, got my job.
Let me stop you. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I don't think a lot of people really understand that.
Well, in Chicago politics, and it's kind of funny because one of our couple of our last few aldermen that knew how to run the city, but in my opinion, um, the one great and wonderful Alderman Ed Burke was just indicted and convicted, as everybody probably knows. Who is a close friend. So was his mother. His wife was close friends with my mother. But going back to my time with the 36th Ward, I basically got called in, went in and saw the alderman at the time and said, my dad said, you go in, you see the alderman, and you do whatever he tells you to do. And I was a young kid, 20 years old. And I'm like, okay. So I walk in the alderman's office, and he says, introduces me to a man, and he says, this guy's my guy in the sheriff's office. You do whatever he tells you to do. And basically, you'll go on the sheriff's department. People who were involved in the upper echelon of the sheriff's department were selling our badges. It was, 500 if you wanted to work court services, 800 to go to the jail, 5,000 for sheriff's police. And, I got told, listen, we want to you got to go through the jail if you ever want to go to sheriff's police. I'm like, okay. I said, well, I'm already at sheriff's police, but, I'm not sworn. And so I went and I met with Igor, and he says, you got to go downtown, see this guy, Jack Novelli, who was our chief investigator at the time, for basically hiring and firing through the sheriff's supposed merit board system. And I'm like, okay. So, I go down there, and you got to kind of picture in your mind I'd say about a 60-year-old craggy old guy, gravelly voice, big burly guy. He says, come on out in the hallway with me, kid. I says, okay, no problem. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come back tomorrow. I want you to bring me $800, and I want you to meet me up in this hallway with the money. And I looked at him and I said, all right. And, I was young. I was, in my 20s. And Dad, what do I do? This guy asked me for money. And my dad kind of sat down, and he educated me at that point. He says, Chucky, he says, you're stepping into this world. There's a lot of commitments that you're going to have to make, a lot of choices you're going to have to make. He said, this is how it goes. He says, I'm going to lend you the money. You put it in an envelope, you go bring it to this man, you do whatever he tells you to do. Go back down there the next day, and I'm in a suit and tie, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to make a political contribution or something like that. Well, I called a number to his office. It's back when we had the old brick cell phones. And I call his number. He answers. He says, you here? I said, yes, sir, I am. I'll be right out. Okay. So he walks out in the hallway. He said, there's a bathroom down the hallway. I want you to go in that bathroom and go in a stall and put that envelope in a stall. I looked at this guy. I said, I want the job, but I don't know if I want it that bad. And
What's going through your
you
mind
know,
at this time? I mean, this is obviously
a
surprising.
lot of a lot of things was going through my mind at that time, to be honest with you, Carrie. And but I trusted my old man, and I walked in the bathroom and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, I don't see anybody else in here. What's this guy up to? What's he thinking? You know, is he a Catholic priest or something? And I went in, I took the envelope out of my suit coat, I put it on top of the toilet tank. He walked in there, he says, go wash your hands. I was washing my hands real good. He goes in the stall, comes back out. He takes me in the hallway. Now, you and I probably remember, at our age, the Scantron tests from when we were kids, the little thin strips. And he pulls out a pencil and he goes up on a wall by a phone booth and he's filling in all the circles. He goes, come here. I said, what? He goes, sign here. Oh, okay. I signed him. You just passed your police exam. You're hired.
What was your initial impression of law enforcement before any of this happened? What made you want
Um,
a police officer?
my uncle was a deputy, and I had stars in my eyes. I wanted to be a street cop. I wanted to work on the streets. Typical what every kid probably thinks about being a police officer in Chicago. I wanted to go to Chicago, but my dad said not only no, but hell no, because he had friends and relatives that were on the police department in the city. And, he was like, no, this is where we want you, and we have a reason for it. I'm like, okay. So I was basically being groomed to go to the sheriff's department for a reason, to use my position to protect the outfit.
Okay. And so,
Um,
did you know at that time what that sort of symbiotic relationship was between the mob and the police department?
Not well, I mean, anybody that lives in Chicago knew that if you were on the job politically, you were affiliated. I mean, if you were Italian, you were from the north or south side, you were connected. If you had a political job, I don't care where, sewer department, garbage departments, sanitation, streets and sewers, you were either very heavily politically connected, or if you had any of the upper echelon jobs, like my father did, like his brothers did, you were hooked in with somebody. I very fortunately was very close to Joe Lombardo since I was 5 years old. Not thinking of him as Joey the Clown Lombardo, but more as like, Carrie, this is where it gets a little hard. My guardian angel. And I know using that word and saying Joe Lombardo, your viewers are like, and I've went through this with other interviews and I really don't have a problem talking about it. And I don't want to jump around topics, but
Well,
I knew what the
give us a little bit of a context. What was your relationship with him? What would you describe him as? I mean, is he like a father figure? Like what was he like?
Joe to me. Now I don't know how Joe thought of me. Okay. But I know how I thought of Joe. Um, I thought of him as like a surrogate father or grandfather.
Explain that a little bit because your father, right? Your father, what was his, I mean, sending photos to her of bodies on slabs, obviously a veiled threat that this is what's going to happen to her.
It was intimidation tactics, and I remember it very well, very vividly.
So who was your father? Like what was his connection?
At the time in the 70s, he was a nobody, but his closest friend was a very, very heavyweight associate. And you have to understand, and I've explained this to people time and time again, and this includes law enforcement, the Chicago Crime Commission and the charts they have and the things that they put out publicly. I call it the diatribe, is 50% bullshit. Okay. you had so many guys that were mob associates and mob connected in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s that the crime commission never knew about. We were kept quiet. We weren't, and I don't mean to disparage New York for your viewers, but we weren't sitting out in front of social clubs in tracksuits and gold chains and, grabbing our cojones as people walk by and, hey, what are you doing? It wasn't like that. Chicago has always been low key. That's why we didn't take a major indictment until Family Secrets. You'd get one here, one there, something would happen. But again, because of the astute way Joey, Tony, Momo, Sam Giancana ran and operated our family or our organization, you didn't have drugs being dealt in Chicago through the outfit. I'm sure you had one or two guys that dabbled in it, but if they got found out, they went, and they went permanently. And that was just the way things were.
You have this very interesting, really quite traumatic background, but definitely touching the edges of organized crime, growing up in a family that obviously knew the important relationship between law enforcement and the outfit. So you then get into law enforcement because you also understand that politically it's a good move. You get into law enforcement, you can be a part of the change and the solution rather than part of the problem, perhaps, or at least helping that relationship, fostering that relationship. So
at my age, Carrie, it was the greatest job to have. You had insurance. I was just getting married. I knew the commitments, once I had gotten actually hired and in the system, and I had seen things as a younger child, which is a separate topic, but I was, I'd witnessed the Seifert murder as a young child. Didn't really understand what I witnessed, but I witnessed it.
Why don't we tell the viewers what that is, the Seifert murder? Because I want to get to the next murder too, but I want to develop your background to show.
My uncle Tom Schreiber was a mob wannabe, straight up. He was a sociopath. When he drank, he was an extremely dangerous man. Obviously, as it's no secret, and you've probably read the file, I attempted to testify in the Family Secrets case for Joe, because I know for a fact that day that we were there, I know Joe. I know what Joe looks like. I know what he sounds like. I know how he walked, how he talked. And in retrospect, going back to my memories of what happened, and then please understand, in the time that Danny Seifert was killed, no, I didn't have a clue who was on that hit team. I didn't have a clue that Danny Seifert got shot down in front of his wife and his son. When I began to escalate in the family and I became more trusted and I talked to people that were in the know and were there or knew people that were there, I know what really happened. I wanted to save my marriage. So I went and handled it in a way that I had so much clout. I could walk into a currency exchange and I had certain people I did business with that would cash a check for me for any amount. And I wrote several bad checks. He, very wonderful sheriff of Will County and his team were astute enough after my then fiance, now wife, basically called and said, don't let anything happen to him or you'll probably wish you didn't. And I was put in the medical unit. And while I was there, I had a gentleman named Richard Proctor approach me. And the deputies didn't want to kind of because I got everywhere I've ever been, I've gotten preferential treatment. One, because I carry myself like a gentleman, the way I was raised, old school. I still respect law enforcement to the utmost. All the deputies knew I was, former officer and sheriff, which makes a big difference when you're in a county jail. And they had seen my podcast, several of them, and they saw my tattoos and they're like, we got a mob boss here. Proctor was a mob wannabe. Oh my God, he's read all these books on the mob and questions to me about the outfit and what's it like to be on the inside, and who did you know, and is this real, is that real, and I basically gave him an education about the difference between Chicago and New York, like I always give people. And long story short, we were at various times either celled in the same cell block, which they're very small in a medical unit. I think the largest one is like 6 or 8 people. Or we were next door to each other and we could send what inmates call kites or notes back and forth. Well, he was fighting a murder trial. A young girl that he was seeing at the time, Hannah Kukuk, was an eyewitness to the murder, and she was also being held on a material witness bond in the jail.
Can you tell us briefly what the murder involved?
Yes, it took place on Proctor had a birthday party on New Year's Eve.
Okay, how long was Proctor in custody before he went to trial?
A long time, I believe almost 3 years, 2 to 3 years.
And so by the time you met him, how long had he been in there?
At about a year, maybe a year and a half.
So Proctor's frustrated with his public defenders.
Oh my God, he threatened to hurt one of them. That was actually how I ended up contacting the sheriff's department initially. Is he came thing that happened before that, and I laid this responsibility on the sheriff's department very plainly at trial. They've got a material witness being held in custody for her safety so they don't lose her because she was a runner. And Proctor went to court the same day she went to court, trying to get, because she was trying to obviously be released from custody. Proctor went to court and they passed each other in the hallway. And he came back and he told me, he says, my God, I could have got her right then and there. Why the hell didn't I do it? And I'm like, what? He told me one day he didn't like her. She was female. I think she was Indian, not American Indian, but of some type of Indian persuasion. I really don't know what her ethnicity was, but she was an ethnic woman of somewhere in that area. And he said, I'm going to court and I'm going to hit this bitch in the head if I have to get rid of her. So I went to the phone, me being how I feel about respect to women, no matter what. I called the public defender's office and I said, I need to talk to you now. It's extremely important. Public defenders is in danger and you need to protect Miss Varghese because Proctor plans on assaulting her to get her off his case. Because other people in the pod told him, oh, well, that's easy. All you got to do is hit the bitch in courtroom and, they got to take her off your case. There's a conflict of interest. So this dumb thought that was going to be his out to get rid of this one that he felt wasn't defending him properly. At that point, he came back extremely frustrated because obviously he was foiled and, she removed herself from the case by, the court quietly got her off the case, appointed someone else who, in his opinion,
he doesn't know that he doesn't know that
no. He mysteriously, she didn't show up in court that day because I was able to get something done before, between the transport process and the process of actually being called before the judge. I acted quick enough that they had the intel and actually listened to me because thank God they respected me enough to know that if I came out there and told them there was a problem, to the deputy's credit, they were like, Miceli doesn't bullshit, and they acted on it, protected Miss Varghese that day, replaced her with a male assistant public defender, I believe. And Proctor hated this guy worse than he hated what he had. So he ended up going pro se, meaning representing himself. And he was getting very, very, very frustrated. And at one point, I found out that my case was going to be resolved because I had one of the top attorneys in Will County, my fiance, hired for me. And he knew this case was bullshit that they had against me. I knew it was bullshit. but I was in the process of a divorce and some other things, and medically I was not being well taken care of there because of my health problems. And they basically came to an agreement that I would take some probation and be released. Had nothing to do with my cooperation with Proctor. I asked for nothing. I got nothing. I will not ask for anything. And in the midst of me getting all of my stuff worked out, they turn around and Proctor approaches me and he says, "Hey, brother, you know, he claims to be Italian, but I've never heard of anybody named Proctor that's Italian. Um, if you do a favor for me, when I get out, I'll become a member of your crew and I'll do anything you ever ask me to do." You know, I'm thinking, okay, well, the state ain't got me anywhere else. They're trying to set me up for conspiracy to commit murder. So I immediately reached out to the sheriff's department, had a meeting with officers with the Will County Sheriff's Police, who put me in contact with Steger. I had physical evidence where I had written down a ton of information about the case he gave me. I pretty much at that point knew already what really happened. I had a map of the crime scene. I knew how the body was moved. I knew what really happened to a very equipment, the conversation. And we had made a code word up for Hannah. He had a German Shepherd dog named Sammy. And I had told him, you know, after I had met with police, of course, I said, when I leave here, if I call you and talk to you about this, we're not going to say Hannah, obviously, on a recorded phone because they listen to everything. I said, we'll reference Hannah as Sammy. He said, okay, good idea. So when I called him back, I says, hey, we located Sammy. And this was the script that me and the feds worked out with him. And I said, we located Sammy. I said, but I'm on paper, meaning probation. I said, where she's at, I can't go. I said, but I've got my cousin who's with my crew. I said, he works with me. I said, talking to him is just like talking to me. I said, his name is Eddie. I said, when my cousin Eddie gets a hold of you, he's going to handle this for me. And I said, now I'm going to ask you again. And I'm paraphrasing here. I said, I'm going to ask you again. Are you sure you want this done? Because you're going to owe some favor. I was the only witness that was on the stand 3 times. His trial was, from the prosecution end, extremely professional. From his end, as a pro se, it was like the Keystone Cops.
Yeah, he's cross-examining you, right?
Pardon?
He's cross-examining you, right?
He tried, if that's what you want to call it. He tried to attack me in the courtroom. And he said, well, I want him to agree that if you're in the mob, you kill people and that you're dishonest. And I looked at him and he took the book back, and I ended up, Carrie, at this point, I gave the jury an education on organized crime. I said, ladies and gentlemen, and I directed it to the jury. I said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I said, unfortunately, I have to explain to you, organized crime doesn't work the way it does in Mr. Proctor's head. Mr. Proctor is a wannabe. He's never been involved in organized crime. I says, and anybody that is involved, of course, they commit dishonest acts, but you also have people that own businesses. You have people that do work for the city, the state, the county, the government. I gave them basically a very short version of 101 Chicago mob. Next question is, did you ever tell a lie? And I looked at this silly son of a bitch and I told the jury the truth. I said, if I were to sit here and say I or anyone else in this courtroom never told a lie in their life, I would be a liar and I would look like an absolute fool. I said, of course I've lied. You've lied, I've lied, they've lied. I said, but one thing I'm not lying about is the fact that you murdered your best friend.
You feel like it's another abuse almost, right? It's
Yeah.
a way of using you for information, and information is currency, and then you're discarded. And do you think that if you know, if there aren't certain provisions put in place, that this might have a chilling effect on people coming forward and wanting to help and wanting to get, I mean,
Oh, that-
you're unusual in that respect because you're not asking for something in exchange, but a lot of people do sort of have that transactional, you know, bargaining thing. Like if I give you this information, this is what I want in return. And you're sort of in a unique position and not wanting that, but really just doing it out of your, almost your historical, you know, base where you've done this because you sort of grew up in that and you knew what you wanted to do. You always had a sort of your eye on law enforcement and doing the right thing and justice. And I mean, what do you think? And well, let me ask it in a two-part question because you're out now, right? And do you have a target on your back? I mean, do you feel that you have protection?
I have no protection.